What's up, NBA fan? What's up, all sports fans? This your boy JB, host of the Behind the Bench podcast networking channel. Just want to give a shout out to the rest of the crew. I'm talking about Shad, Kelvin Jermaine, KB Film Room, Big Dog Talk Sports. That's right. For everyone who's tuning in, we hope that you support Behind the Bench, become a subscriber, and help make this show the best that it can be. Okay. Man, oh man. The NBA, right? National Basketball Association. And throughout its history, that started in 1946, I believe. You had a lot of great players in this league. You had a lot of great teams in this league, man. But I think certain points of references and terminologies and distinctions are being thrown out and used too loosely. And what's crazy is, man, like, if you was a fan of the NBA and you grew up or you started watching basketball during that time, and if you remember all the great teams in the 80s who won championships, the Showtime Lakers, the Boston Pride Celtics of Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, the 83 Philadelphia 76ers, Mose Malone, Dr. J. Andrew Toney, the 89 Detroit Pistons, Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Benny Johnson, and whatnot. What's funny is, and if I honestly, I don't want to say remember, but if it honestly happened, I would say it. I do not recall any reference to those squads that I just mentioned, those championship squads. There was not any reference of them being identified as super teams. And see, this is what, and I realize many may not choose to do so. I get that, but they need to know. This is what a lot of basketball fans of the new youth generation need to realize. This whole era has confused everything. Now, like I said, I believe we are on the tail end of this era of watching superstars team up, player empowerment, because ultimately it don't guarantee anything. It don't guarantee anything because I keep on seeing teams like the Denver Nuggets. 2 years ago, Golden State Warriors retooling their roster with young talent and then rising back to a championship level. The Toronto Raptors in 2019, the Milwaukee Bucks in 2021. I keep on seeing teams break through and win championships without having the need to stack the deck or, having a roster featuring 3 franchise players. I'm going to tell you the difference between the great teams of yesterday versus teams that are being built in a way where they're designed to try to win right now, where you throw all your chips in the middle of the table. First of all, those teams back then that were successful, they didn't throw all their chips in the middle of the table, and they won for a longer period of time. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when the Lakers created Showtime, when you had the 83 76ers who won the championship. They was building up to that point over a 6-year period that started during the 1976-1977 season when they acquired Dr. J from the ABA after the ABA disbanded and merged with the NBA per se. They brought in Dr. J and Bobby Jones, and they constantly drafted players. Andrew Toney, Maurice Cheeks, Andrew Toney, Daryl Dawkins, people like that. And they pursued a championship over a 6-year period, and they realized they was a final piece away, and they traded for Moses Malone, and they won the championship in 1983. The Los Angeles Lakers, after trading for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1975, 1976, he played for the franchise for 4 seasons before they drafted Magic Johnson. And previous to that, they brought in, drafted Norm Nixon and Michael Cooper, right? And then later on down the line, James Worthy, Byron Scott, A.C. Green. Boston Celtics, you draft Larry Bird, and then you draft Kevin McHale. You make a key trade. You bring in Robert Parrish, and then a couple years later you draft Danny Ainge, and then you make a key trade and you bring in a veteran Dennis Johnson. And then remember they drafted Len Bias in 1986. We all know what happened to him, unfortunately. And then a couple years later they drafted Reggie Lewis. The Detroit Pistons, they built their franchise around Isaiah Thomas. It took the Pistons 8 years to win a championship after they drafted Isaiah Thomas. Then they made a key move. They brought in, traded for Bill Laimbeer. He was not a superstar. And then they brought in Vinnie Johnson, who was not he was a very talented player, but he wasn't a superstar. He wasn't a franchise player. And then they drafted Joe Dumars out of McNeese State. Then they drafted Dennis Rodman out of Southeast Oklahoma State. Then they drafted John Sally out of Georgia Tech, if I'm not mistaken. And then they made a key move, brought in Adrian Dantley. And then for the final piece to the puzzle that they felt was needed, they traded Adrian Dantley for Mark Aguirre. So the way the Pistons were built, it seemed like they would draft a couple of players and then they make a key trade. And then they would draft a couple of players and then they make a key trade. That's how they built. But it took them 8 years. Chicago Bulls, of course, they drafted Michael Jordan. And then 3 years later, during Jordan's second year, they traded and acquired John Paxson to be his running mate from 1986 up until 1993. And then they drafted Horace Grant, and then they acquired the draft rights to bring in Scottie Pippen. And then they made a key trade. Actually, I forgot during the second year of Jordan career, they also drafted Charles Oakley. And then 3 years later, they traded Charles Oakley for Bill Cartwright. And they would continue to build the roster by primarily drafting players: B.J. Armstrong, Will Perdue, Stacey King, Scott Williams. So the pattern is the difference between those teams that won then versus teams that have been, at the forefront over these past 14 years or so. What constitutes a super team is not building a team from the bottom and becoming dominant and having a long-standing run. That's not a super team. A super team is designed to win immediately over a short period of time. And the way it's constructed, it runs its course after the third year and it begins to crumble by year 4. That's not what happened with them teams back then. They wrote your average team that was successful, won championships. They had an average run of about 7 to 8 years. 7 to 8 years. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is, okay, when you build a super team, I'm talking about a super team where three franchise. Okay, let's go back to the Showtime Lakers. Let's go back to the Showtime Lakers and see the standards were different then in terms of who should be identified as a superstar. Okay. Showtime Lakers, they had a big three, no doubt about it. Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy. But according to the standard during the 80s, James Worthy was known as Big Game James, right? But he was not identified as a superstar. Was he an all-star? No doubt about it. But a superstar franchise player, that's another level of expectation in terms of how you view individually as a player. Robert Parrish is a Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. See, you can be a Hall of Famer, but not necessarily be a franchise player. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is a super team, as we have witnessed over these past 14 years, when three superstars join forces for the first time in their prime, you destabilize two franchises to make that happen. So two franchises who were at least playoff level teams, where they were eliminated from the landscape in terms of postseason. Right? That's not what happened with them teams back then. Boston didn't have to poach players from other franchises to pursue winning. Showtime Lakers didn't have to poach players from other franchises or superstars from other franchises to pursue winning. The 76ers didn't have to poach players from other franchises to pursue winning. The Detroit Pistons didn't have to poach players from other franchises to pursue winning. The Chicago Bulls didn't have to poach players from other franchises to pursue winning. That's the difference. Also, with a super team is often finds themselves being top heavy. And what happens is when you're top heavy, your three superstar player command the majority of the salary cap. So therefore, that triggers a situation where to fill out the rest of the roster, you often have to rely on veteran-laden players to sign like 1-year deals, 2 years max at the vet minimum. That's not how teams were built back then. So even though you had Magic, Kareem, and Worthy, you still had a well-rounded roster. And when I'm talking about well-rounded, I'm talking about the second unit. Same thing applies for the Boston Celtics. The Detroit Pistons went 10 deep. That was their strength as a team. They were 10 deep and they would wear the opponent down. With you bringing in more defenders, you bringing in Vinnie Johnsons and people off the bench who can score, pose a threat scoring wise. So what I'm trying to say is, those teams back then were not super teams. They were all-time championship teams. Then the ones that won a string of championships over a long period of time, they became what we know as dynasties. A dynastic team does not constitute being a super team. See, a super team is something, it just the term super team, when you really break it down, it means it's like something that's not natural. See what I'm saying? Like, okay, what I'm trying to say is, okay, the Lakers had a big three in the 80s, but lesser teams had their own version of the big three. And so what gives the impression that those teams back then were super teams, for revisionists, well, the reality is the league was more mature then because they didn't draft in. You didn't have one and done players. You didn't have 19-year-olds coming into the league. They drafted players with multiple years of college experience, on average 3 years of college. So when they entered the NBA, they was more equipped to come in and make an immediate impact for the team who drafted them. Like when James Worthy was drafted to the Lakers, he came in right away. He averaged double figures in his rookie season. Whereas in today's league, since the one and done era, to put a stop to drafting high school players or prep age players who were not equipped at all to make an immediate impact on the professional level. So now you're drafting 19-year-olds, and it's going to take about 3 to 4 years on average before you start seeing them really ascend and start to mature as players. Right? So your team may not really take off until that third or fourth year when that player who you drafted to be like a cornerstone piece starts to emerge and starts to mature. Whereas in the 80s, players coming in like Patrick Ewing, number 1 pick, he played all 4 years of college. So his rookie year, he come in averaging 20 a game. Of course, Michael Jordan coming in. His rookie year, he averaged 28 points a game. Bird came in his rookie year averaging 20 a game. You see what I'm saying? As a rookie. Shaquille O'Neal came in as a rookie center, averaging 23, 24 a game. Alonzo Mourning come in his rookie year. He played all 4 years of college at Georgetown. He come in averaging 22 a game. David Robinson, he served like a 2-year naval commitment after playing college basketball. He comes in right away. He averages 23, 24 a game. Already considered possibly the best center in basketball. You see what I'm saying? So that's what gives the impression that any team back then who was dominant was super teams. No, what it was players coming in. They was more mature to come in and make an immediate impact to support the featured players or the top players who were already there on the team who drafted them. That's the difference. But a super team, what we've seen go down, and this is another difference, another major difference. These super teams that form up, in order for this to happen, the players who were on the team prior to, they have to be removed, waived, traded off to create cap space to sign those 3 superstars. Or you trade what you already have and young talent along with a multitude of draft picks to flip that around to bring in said superstar. That's not how teams rolled back then. See, it's a reverse process. Back then, you started from the ground up. The Detroit Pistons, the Chicago Bulls, the Lakers wasn't known as what they're known to be now. That didn't start until 1980 because, contrary to popular belief, they won their first title in L.A. in 1972. It took them 8 years before they won their next championship in L.A., and that's when they won 5 championships in 1 decade and became the team in the 80s. You see what I'm saying? But the process was you draft a star player out of college who on average had 3 years of collegiate basketball experience. And more often than not, when you draft them, they're 21 years old. They have become an adult. They're more physically and mentally mature than a 19-year-old coming to the league. Okay? Whereas you look at someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo, amazing player. He's going to be first ballot Hall of Famer. But he entered the league at 18. It took him 4 years before he started averaging 20 points a game. Kawhi Leonard came in at like 19 years old. It took him 5 years before he started averaging 20 points a game. Paul George entered the NBA. It took him about 4 years before he started averaging 20 points a game. I can give other examples. So, but those players back then, when a team wanted to keep their run going, you draft someone like a James Worthy, and then he comes and make that immediate impact, and he becomes a staple of your franchise. So revisionists who look back on those teams had the impression that they were super teams. No, that was really the standard. You see what I'm saying? They didn't have to compromise other franchises and poach players to sustain their run. They mainly kept it going by drafting more players to their team. But a super team actually operates in reverse because it flips over what's already there to bring in multiple superstars. Where the system is manipulated to create that super team. That's not how it went down back then. It was a totally different thing. It was what you call by the book. It was no shady stuff going on. And as a matter of fact, you look at someone like Larry Bird, he gets drafted to the Boston Celtics, and he helped lead them from 28 wins to 60 wins, which was the largest increase in victories from one season to the next in league history. And I think later on, David Robinson exceeded that during this rookie season, leading to a bigger increase in victories from the previous season prior to when he was drafted by the Spurs. So what I'm saying is the NBA functioned totally different back then. In order to create a super team, we've seen take place over the past decade plus, you have to mortgage off or take away to produce that type of team. And someone out of the three superstars had to be willing to take a reduced role and compromise their game to make it happen. Where their statistical production decreases. That's not what happened back then. When James Worthy was drafted by the Lakers, he wasn't asked to compromise his game to be the third guy. He was the third guy naturally. And then when Kareem got older and was eventually retired from basketball, then James Worthy's role on the team changed from the number 3 guy to like the number 2 guy. It was a natural evolution. See, it's totally different. It's totally different. And there's so many nuances to it. What I'm trying to say is fundamentally, structurally, those were not super teams back then. They played super, but they were not super teams. So what I'm trying to say is a super team today often finds themselves like Golden State Warriors. That wasn't a super team. Golden State Warriors started when they drafted Steph Curry. They was winning like prior to, after the Baron Davis years, they was winning like they went back to winning like 19 games, and Steph Curry had to go through. He had to go through that year-to-year struggle. And a couple years later, they brought in Klay Thompson, and the next year they brought in Draymond Green and Harrison Barnes. And then they start adding the complementary pieces to that core. And that's been those 3 players have been a consistent core for that franchise since Curry was drafted in 2009. They didn't take no shortcuts. They didn't have to deplete their roster and free up cap space to produce that team. You see, it's a totally different. A super team is going to compromise what they already have, remove what they already have to manipulate the system to bring in 3 superstars. And that's how you know that Boston Celtics team of 2008 wasn't no super team, because they traded for Kevin Garnett and they traded for Ray Allen. But in the process, they were not left being top heavy, because they drafted Rajon Rondo, who was entering his second year after they, once they traded for KG and Ray Allen. Then they drafted Leon Poole. They drafted Kendrick Perkins. And then they had great veteran pieces such as P.J. Brown and like Sam Cassell. And then Eddie House was kind of like a young veteran player, but they didn't have to like overhaul the entire roster and ask players to sign for less than they value to vet minimum deals to fill a roster out. That wasn't no super team. See, it ain't just about the term, it's about how the team is put together, where you go top heavy by bringing in 3 franchise players. Kevin Garnett, when he was traded to Boston, he was entering his 13th year in the league. He was past his prime. Ray Allen was entering KG was entering his 14th year in the league. Ray Allen was entering his 12th year in the league. They were both past their prime. They were both on the other side of 30. But like I said, man, and I get it, man. I know fans of that guy, LeBron James, and I get it, man. And see, like I said, a lot of his fans think people are against him, man. It's not about that, man. But we never seen in the history of the NBA, they can sit here and talk about free agency, all day long. But at the end of the day, free agency just didn't start in 2010. We never seen 3. I'm going to repeat that one more time. We never seen 3 because Chris Bosh was a franchise player. It's just that they didn't, build a quality team. Now, that was someone, when they talk about was so-and-so didn't have no help, they didn't build, after about 2007-ish, we'll say after 2008, they didn't field a team around him that can compete. His second best player was averaging 13 points a game. Chris Bosh up there in Toronto. So we never seen 3 franchise players. Dwayne Wade was definitely a franchise player. Led the league in scoring in 2009, coming off of shoulder surgery, mind you. And he was considered the second best 2 guard in basketball, only behind Kobe Bryant, and the best 2 guard in the Eastern Conference. Chris Bosh, okay. LeBron James, right? The best small forward in the Eastern Conference. And then Chris Bosh was the best stretch power forward in the Eastern Conference. Wade was in his prime. LeBron and Chris Bosh were entering their prime. So let's say Wade was 28, LeBron was 25, Bosh was 26 years old. We never seen 3 prime superstar franchise players join forces. Ever. And there's nothing that can be said that can challenge that. Cats out there may say, well, Lakers had Magic, but the Lakers drafted Magic. It's a totally different dynamic. Magic was brought in, he was 20 years old. So technically, when you draft a player, you may believe he's gonna turn out to be great, but you have to see if that's going to be realized. That's why they call it scouting. Also, to create a super team, the system, the whole situation has to be manipulated, as I mentioned before. You have to recruit players, then you have to start recruiting players. Veteran-laden guys who's willing, who's trying to, cash in, and try to win a championship, through a rushed process and being asked to take minimum pay to fill the roster out. And it just shows the reason why they have to do that is because 3 franchise level players have joined forces, which shows that 3 franchise level players in their prime should not be on the same team together. That wasn't the case with Showtime. That wasn't the case with Bird Mikal Parrish. Matter of fact, Mikal's rookie year, he averaged like about 5-6 points a game. So you didn't know Kevin McHale was going to turn out to be the type of player that we know him as history has shown. Danny Ainge was a darn good player. He was never considered a superstar. I don't believe Danny Ainge ever made an all-star. You see what I'm saying? So I just want to break that down real quick, man. In closing, like I said, man, this era has created, and like I said, it's not about the talent, man. As a basketball fan, I don't get in say what era is the best, which era is most skilled, because ultimately, man, it's not about, well, do you can a player from 2024 beat a player from 1994? No, it's about what you do when you play. What did you do when you play? During the time that you was in the league. So, this era has created a lot of confusion, man. It's created a lot of confusion. And more often than not, you wind up falling short more than you do winning. What I'm trying to say is, if you believe in your ability, I'm talking about truly believe in your ability, and truly elevate those around you, if you're truly the best, you can lead them to the top and to the promised land. If you're the best, you can do it. We've seen Jokic do it. We saw Giannis do it 3 years ago. Milwaukee built a program around him over an 8-year period with a G League level player as his number 2 guy and Chris Middleton. And he led him to a championship in a small market town. Was considered a small market town anyway. So a super team, man. And like I said, and I'll close with this. When they joined forces down there in Miami, they was promoted, announced, billed, pushed, and identified as the league's. Matter of fact, they said this is the league's first super team. And you remember like it's yesterday. And now they trying to say it's not a super team? Nah, man, you can't do that. Can't do that. Can't do that. Dwayne Wade was a top 3 player in the world. He was a top 3 player. Bosh was a top 10 player. We never seen 2 top 5 players and a top 10 player on the team at the same time. Showtime Lakers didn't have that. They had a complete team. They had a dynastic team, but coaching was involved in that. You know, building the type of team, bringing on type of players that could add to the chemistry that's already there. But like I said, I'm going to conclude this with the fact that I think this term is being used loosely to try to rationalize what's been going on over this past decade or so. But the fact of the matter is, a super team also led to positionless basketball. It devalued the center position. That's not what happened back then. Now you see players, you got players who are really like forwards playing the 5 spot because of the influence of the super team. So when you got three franchise players joining forces, well, you say to yourself, man, we don't have to play a conventional lineup. Shit, we can go small. And when this all first started, you figured, well, we can just outscore the opponent. Defense became de-emphasized. See, this thing is deep. And when you understand what competition is, I'm talking about when you truly understand what competition entails, man, and you pull back the layers and you see how detrimental this whole concept is. Like I said, it's not about the talent. It's about the mentality. And when three superstars agree to join forces in a prime, well, that mentality becomes shifted and becomes devalued within itself. And you may be a superstar, but you actually stop thinking like one in totality. You see? But I just want to share that. And I do believe this era is coming to an end. And the league is going to be better for it. The league, because you have so much young talent in this league coming up. You look at teams like OKC. You look at teams like Minnesota. They not super teams, but they getting the most out of their ability as a unit, and the coaching is there. That's another thing. When you stacking the deck, you feel that you don't need no coach that's gonna demand out of you. Cause you figure, oh man, we can win enough games, man. We can let a game drop here and there, cause come playoff time, it ain't gonna matter. We gonna run the table. That's not from a confidence mindset. That's from a mindset of manipulating the situation. It's two different realms. So it's been a detriment in so many ways that really, when you really delve into it and pull back the layers, you can find one problem after the next. But you got franchises out here, man, Sacramento Kings. Not saying they're going to win a championship, but they have come a long way from the past 20 years where they were not making the playoffs after the Chris Webber, Mike Bibby years, the New Orleans Pelicans, teams like that, although they're dealing with an injury right now. But the Orlando Magic, look what the Orlando Magic is doing. They got a darn good team out there. And they drafted. That's another thing, too, about the super team. See, those championship teams, the 86 Celtics, when they won the championship, you know what they did? They drafted another player in Len Bias. They kept it going by drafting. That's not what a super team does. That's not how it functions. It takes away. It don't continue to build and add on. It takes away. You see what I'm saying? But a super team don't really rely on bringing in drafted players. It's trying to bring in free agents to fill these roster out. See, the whole concept, when you really break it down, you see the differences. So I just want to share that. And, I'm not trying to change minds. I'm just trying to break things down from a historical perspective. Anybody can do this and delve into it, but those teams back then, they were not super teams. The Portland Trailblazers of the late 80s, early 90s, they had the deepest roster in basketball. They had a deeper roster than the Pistons. They had a more talented roster than the Pistons and the Chicago Bulls. They were the deepest team in the league over a 3-year period. You wouldn't find a deeper team what their Portland team had with Clyde Drexler and them. But they weren't no super team. See. So I just want to share that. Until next time, this is JB for BTB Behind the Bench.